It is so wonderful to be here today. And I am going to tell you about a brave new experiment with a lot of creativity and a lot of curiosity. We are about to transform the entire world into what we call playful learning landscapes. Get ready. Transforming your neighborhood, transforming your cities into family-friendly, child-friendly, inclusive spaces everywhere that you look. I want to start with the whole purpose of this conference. This Congreso is about bringing more humanity into our lives. And a New York Times columnist named David Brooks wrote something beautiful that I think encapsulates what we're trying to do. We want a society run by people who are smart, yes, but who are wise, who are people who are perceptive, curious, and caring. And we haven't been doing that. We've been creating what he calls brains on a stick. We haven't been creating humans in our schools, and we need to create better humans. Now, this may sound a little absurd, but across the world, in the United States, in Europe, at UNESCO, at the OECD, everyone is asking whether we might be able to use the science and the science of how humans learn to actually create better educational systems. And here's the key, both in and out of school. Chile has actually been a leader in this movement. Right now, Chile stands with the very best schools in all of Latin America. And Chile knew from the Department of Education and the Ministry of Education that you had to include social emotional learning in the way we educate young children. And so Chile is doing that. But here's the surprise. It turns out that in Chile, as in the United States, only 20% of a child's waking time is in school. Only 20%. Which begs us to ask, what are we doing with the other 80% of a child's waking time? Our mission is to ask how we can do better, to do something with the other 80% of the time that children are outside of school, to increase children's ability in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, literacy, and also social development through placemaking and sustained community engagement. So here's my bold premise for today. You ready? If we teach in the way that human brains learn, I propose that children will learn better. This is the part where you go, duh, but we're doing exactly the opposite. When we look at the science of how children learn, we start to see that they learn when their minds are active, not when they're passive. We learn when the kids are engaged, not distracted. We learn when something's meaningful to us, not when it's disembodied. We learn, this is a biggie, when we are socially interacting. We learn best when it's iterative, and we learn it in many ways. And we learn best when we're having fun. I know, that sounds counterintuitive. And I just want you to think for a moment about school. When I ask you about the first word that comes to mind when we generally think about school, there is a number one answer. You probably know what it is. Put it out on social media, and the number one answer is boring. What happens in schools? Generally, we're sitting in rows, listening to someone talk at us. That's passive. We're not really as engaged as we could be. A lot of times, it's not so meaningful. And let's face it, guys, it's not joyful. But these are the characteristics of how human brains learn. Maybe we can turn it around. We also want to ask, what do we need to know in a society that has generative AI? Well, we probably need skills that go beyond just taking a reading and math test. I'm not saying reading and math aren't important. I'm saying that we need to go to the next level. We need to learn how to be good collaborators, social navigators. We need to learn how to be better communicators, our language skills, which are based, by the way, on our collaboration skills. Why? Because humans have a social brain, and our collaboration is the medium through which we learn, and that takes us to our language skills. We then need to learn our content, because if you don't have collaboration and communication, you will not learn the content. And then you know what has to come next. Critical thinking, which depends on the content. And creative innovation, which also depends on having enough content. And finally, a biggie, the confidence. The confidence to actually learn from our failure, because we don't always succeed, and we will never learn to persevere, to have grit, or to believe that we can if we are shut down by always having to have a right answer. So we call these the 6 C's, what you need to know in a world with ChatGPT. Last, it needs to fit into the cultural context. We need to hear each other. We need to speak with community members. We need to speak with the children to try to figure out what would be meaningful to them. When I put that together, I actually get what I call the 3-part equation. First, speak with the community, find out about the values. Second, learn how people learn, the science of learning. Third, let's ask what we want out of any education system to create human beings at the end, not just brains on a stick. We are taking that 3-part equation and we are applying it to 3 sectors. The first is in communities, and that's what I'll be talking about today. The second is we're applying it to education writ large in the schools. And we're also applying it out there in the world of screen and digital media. And that's where our research has taken us. But it all began one day when I had a question, and I called a friend of mine and said, "Do you think a bench needs to be a bench?" Well, you might imagine he was quiet on the other end, wondering what in the world I could possibly be talking about. And I said, well, a bench. Like, benches are boring. They're functional, but they're really boring. What do you do with a bench? You go and sit on a bench. And what happens, you know, when people are sitting at a bench and they're at a bus stop, what do? They pick out their cell phones. And then their kids start playing on a cell phone. And there you go, nobody's talking to each other. Nobody's interacting. We live in a lonely society right now because of that. Well, maybe benches could have puzzles near them. Maybe benches could have poetry on them. Maybe benches could have maps in front and help kids learn STEM. When is a bench not a bench? And we started with that question, and we have now grown. We are now in 13 countries and in 22 cities around the world. And we've been studying each installation to see whether it actually changes behavior in the way that helps young brains grow. We co-construct by talking with the community. Start there with the community values. What's important to you? Where should we be in your community? And each community has given us very different answers to that question. Second, we add the how of learning. It needs to be active and engaging, meaningful, socially interactive, iterative, and yes, joyful, with a clear learning goal. And third, we add the 6 C's. And then we see what happens when we start with this recipe. I should let you know now that we've been doing this work for about 15 years now, so we have a rich scientific base to show that it works. And then I thought maybe we should take a peek at what this actually could look like in Chile, or what it looks like at least in the rest of the world. We start here. It's a bus stop in Philadelphia. Does not look like your standard bus stop because the community told us that we should build this bus stop in a particular area where a very famous American named Martin Luther King had given a talk, a Freedom March talk. It mattered to the community that we be on this small plot of land where Martin Luther King gave his talk. And we said, okay, what do you want there? They said, well, We can't afford to have puzzles in our house. Could we have puzzles at a bus stop? And so we said, sure, will you help us design the puzzles? And they did. 100 community members worked with us to create even what the puzzles would look like. We have 4 different puzzles so that when they come, it's not the same thing each time. And you might ask, did it work? Did people use the puzzles? Did people play the games that you put into the bus stop? And the answer was a resounding yes. We even compared what happened to at the bus stop to what goes on in the local playground. And what did you get? You got more people using the kind of talk. Can I match this? Let's put this around here, through, in, out, spatial talk that predicts out to later mathematical ability for young children. And best yet, the parents put their cell phones down and they started interacting with their children. This is Brenna Hasinger-Das, who was a postdoc at the time, now faculty at Pace University, and Itai Palti, who started the Conscious Cities movement and is working with us in Playful Learning Landscapes. 100 community members built this spot. And I have to tell you that after, I guess it's 8 years now, in Philadelphia, in a very under-resourced environment, there is no graffiti anywhere to be found on Playful Learning Landscapes. Everywhere else, but not there, because the community owns it, we don't. But of course, a bus stop in Santa Ana, California, where the whole population is Mexican, is going to be different. They said, we want the game Loteria. Can we put that on a bus stop to build attention skills? And the answer is an absolute yes. Then we went crazy, and we said, if this works, let's build a life-size board game in a park. And so we did. And we thought we might be able to help kids learn mathematics if the dice, which you see here, look carefully, they're very different than other dice. Can you see they're fraction dice? They're not 1 to 6, 1 to 6. So the kids had to roll fractions and move half spaces. And indeed, they learned more mathematics by going in our wonderful game called Parkopolis. Take a look at this. This is what we're doing in libraries. I mean, libraries in some of these neighborhoods, no one was going to the library. And now, what we found when we started to build a climbing wall made of letters is that all of a sudden kids love going to the library with their parents. We also built a stage. We also built a nook right there in the books. And the kids go there and read. Guess what happened to library cards? They went up by 30% in our library called Playberry. Here's an interesting one. This cost all of $65. We went out with paint cans and we repainted a basketball court. And yes, I promise we are working on soccer or football right now. But in this basketball court, at the 3 line, you actually throw a 1. And then you move in and you're throwing a 3/4. Or a 0.75. And then you move in, and it's half, or 0.5. I think you can see where this is going. We challenged the kids to throw enough points to add up to a certain number. They went out there. Andy Bustamante actually helped paint the court. You see him here, now faculty at University of California, Irvine. And when we did the study, I know you won't believe this, so I'm going to have to say it really clearly. Four times, they went out to play this at recess. 4 times, 15 minutes of recess. They came in and they knew fraction, decimal, conversion, and could pass a standardized test. The teacher looked at us and said, oh, I have all this free time now. I'm going to put away the worksheets. Here's another one that we did outside of school. You see the story wheel here? When you spin the first one, you get the character. When you spin the second one, you get what's the context? When you spin the third one, what happened? Fourth one, what's the resolution? What will you spin to tell your story and stand up and tell your story? So we're playing games like this and, in fact, changing the whole context of what goes on in a school. Murals work great. Here's a mural from Santa Ana where we created an I Spy game right on the walls. What are kids doing? They're playing with their parents. They're finding things. And look hard. Maybe you'll see them too. But here's a place which is pretty boring. Hospital waiting rooms. Ever been at a clinic, guys? They're terrible. All you do is wait, wait, wait. So we picked places where kids wait and they go naturally with their parents. Now that we have murals up in the hospital rooms, everybody's looking at the murals and cell phones go down and conversation goes up. Another example, we went to supermarkets. Wait till you hear this one. We worked with the community again in Santa Ana, and they said, what we really want to do is we want to learn how to pick vegetables because that's really important to the grandparents. Got to learn how to pick a good vegetable. Okay, we'll work with vegetables. So you can see it's all in Spanish in Santa Ana. They pick vegetables, and they learn how to do the weight of the vegetables and how to do recipes. That's science. But it looks very different when you get to South Africa. Let me buzz through just a couple more just to show you, because anything, look at this room. If we could meet after my talk, I would say to you, what could we do in this room? How could I make this room into a playful learning landscape? How could I be intentional in the design, not just for the purpose, not just for function, but for learning? Another example, let's look at a STEM game that we just put into Santa Ana, California. How tall are you? Are you as tall, as fast as a buffalo? And how about these beautiful STEM pieces that went into a park in Chicago? Can you see that you're looking for triangles and squares and circles? Can you see that you can use rocks and leaves to find patterns? And all this feeds into later mathematical knowledge. And it fits into any architecture that you can imagine. We tried this even in Venice. So it's quite remarkable how malleable it is if you work with the community. Our latest idea, I was just looking at your zoo yesterday, is what's a zoo for? And the answer many of you would give is it's to go look at animals. But really in the background of the zoos, what they're doing is they're doing climate, sustainability, helping animals, right? Why can't we put that at the front of the zoo through playful learning landscapes? My point is that if you use this three-part equation, you can actually teach pretty much anything. You can make it active and engaging and meaningful and socially interactive and iterative and fun. And that's what we're doing. And we've created a whole slew in Spanish, in English, in Portuguese, and soon to be in Chinese, of wonderful pamphlets that tell you how to do this in your community. We've come up with ways of measuring it that are psychologically sound and also have been gone through by people who work in metro and city planning, so we know how to do it. That's through our work at Brookings. And I guess that brings us to the end where we can ask, what can we do in Chile? What can we do with your community in Santiago? Let's get curious. Let's get creative. Let's reimagine the world that you live in. And I think you'll find it to be a quite exciting, family-friendly place through playful learning landscapes. Thank you.